Have you ever wondered why the woman who seems most untouchable becomes the very object of his desperate pursuit? Why the feminine energy that refuses to bend, that stands sovereign in her own mystery, becomes the focal point of masculine obsession? This is not coincidence. This is the ancient dance of psychological forces that Carl Jung mapped in the deepest caverns of the human psyche, where shadow meets light, where the unconscious projects its hunger onto the canvas of another soul. When a man becomes obsessed with a woman who embodies her authentic power, he is not truly seeing her at all. He is encountering his own anima, that elusive feminine aspect of his unconscious that he has denied, repressed, or failed to integrate. She becomes the living symbol of everything he believes he lacks within himself: mystery, emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, and the courage to exist without external validation. In her presence, his shadow erupts with a violence he cannot comprehend, because she reflects back to him the parts of himself he has abandoned in his desperate attempt to fit into the rigid structures of masculine expectation. The woman who finds herself at the center of such intensity often mistakes this obsession for love, for deep connection, for the validation she has been conditioned to seek. But Jung understood that projection is not love. It is the ego's desperate attempt to possess what it believes exists outside of itself. The man who obsesses does not love the woman before him. He loves the idealized image of his own completeness that he has cast upon her like a net, hoping to capture what he cannot find within his own fractured psyche. This is where your power lies, not in the obsession itself, but in your recognition of it for what it truly is. When you understand that his fixation is not about your inherent worth, but about his psychological hunger, you step into a realm of profound freedom. You are no longer the victim of his projection. You become the mirror that reflects his unconscious back to him, forcing him to confront the very aspects of himself he has been fleeing. The obsessed masculine energy operates from a place of profound emptiness, a void that Seneca would have recognized as the consequence of seeking validation from external sources rather than cultivating inner virtue. This man has built his identity upon achievements, conquests, and the approval of others, never learning to sit with the uncomfortable truth of his own incompleteness. When he encounters a woman who has done the shadow work he has avoided, who has integrated her light and dark, who moves through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who needs nothing from him, his entire worldview shatters. You become dangerous to him precisely because you are not dangerous at all. You are simply whole. And wholeness, to the fragmented masculine psyche, appears as both salvation and threat. He wants to possess what you have discovered within yourself. But possession is impossible when the treasure exists in the realm of inner work rather than external acquisition. His obsession intensifies not because you are playing games or employing manipulation, but because your very existence challenges the fundamental assumptions upon which he has built his identity. The ancient Stoics understood that suffering comes from attachment to outcomes beyond our control. The obsessed man suffers because he has attached his sense of completeness to your response, your attention, your reciprocation. He has made you responsible for his psychological integration, a burden that was never yours to carry. Meanwhile, you who have walked the path of individuation, who have faced your own shadow and emerged with wisdom rather than wounds, remain untouchable not through cruelty, but through self-possession. In this dynamic, you hold the ultimate power, not the power to manipulate or control, but the power to remain centered in your own truth while witnessing his psychological unraveling. This is the feminine energy that Jung recognized as transformative, not the energy that seeks to heal or fix or save, but the energy that simply exists in its full authenticity, allowing others to encounter their own reflections in the depths of that truth. His obsession becomes the very catalyst that could lead him toward his own shadow work, his own journey toward wholeness, if he chooses to turn inward rather than continuing to project outward. But observe how the obsessed masculine responds when confronted with this mirror of wholeness. He does not step back in reverence or gratitude. Instead, he intensifies his pursuit, believing that if he can just find the right combination of words, gestures, or demonstrations of worthiness, he can crack the code of your completeness and claim it as his own. This is the tragic comedy of projection. The harder he grasps, the more elusive you become, not because you are deliberately withholding yourself, but because what he seeks cannot be possessed by another. The woman who understands this psychological dynamic finds herself in a position of extraordinary influence. You are no longer reactive to his emotional storms, his desperate attempts at manipulation, his oscillation between worship and rage. You have transcended the need for his validation because you have cultivated what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, that unassailable fortress of self-worth that cannot be breached by external circumstances. From this place of centeredness, you can witness his obsession with the detached compassion of someone who understands that his suffering is entirely self-created. This detachment is not cruelty, it is wisdom. The feminine energy that has integrated its shadow knows that attempting to rescue the masculine from his own psychological prison only perpetuates the very dynamic that created the obsession in the first place. When you try to soothe his anxiety, explain your boundaries, or provide the reassurance he craves, you are feeding the projection rather than dissolving it. You become complicit in his delusion that salvation exists outside of himself. The truly empowered woman recognizes that his obsession reveals more about his relationship with his own inner feminine than it does about his feelings for her. He has rejected the vulnerable, intuitive, receptive aspects of his own nature, projecting them onto women and then attempting to control or possess these qualities through relationship. His obsession is actually a desperate attempt to avoid the terrifying work of embracing his own emotional depth, his own capacity for surrender, his own need for inner nurturing. When you refuse to be the container for his unprocessed emotions, when you decline to be the solution to his existential emptiness, you force him into direct confrontation with his own psyche. This is perhaps the greatest gift you can offer, though it will initially be experienced as rejection, abandonment, or cruelty. The ego always interprets the withdrawal of projection as personal attack, because it cannot yet comprehend that the very thing it seeks to possess externally already exists within its own depths. You begin to understand that your power lies not in your ability to inspire obsession, but in your capacity to remain unmoved by it. The woman who has done her inner work, who has faced her own demons, and emerged with self-compassion rather than self-judgment, creates a field of energy that is simultaneously magnetic and untouchable. This is not a contradiction, but a paradox. The more complete you become within yourself, the more attractive you become to others, yet the less you need their attraction to feel whole. The obsessed masculine cannot comprehend this paradox because his entire framework is built upon scarcity, competition, and the belief that love is a limited resource to be won or earned. He approaches relationships as conquest rather than communion, seeing your independence as a challenge to be overcome rather than a quality to be respected. His obsession intensifies precisely because you embody the very freedom he has, denied himself the freedom to exist without external validation, to love without attachment, to be powerful without needing to dominate. This is where the ancient wisdom of Epictetus becomes relevant, the understanding that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control our response to what happens to us. The woman who embodies this principle becomes untouchable, not because she is cold or unfeeling, but because she has learned to source her emotional stability from within rather than from the reactions of others. His obsession becomes a form of psychological violence, not necessarily physical, but a relentless assault on your autonomy, your boundaries, your right to exist as a complete being rather than as the missing piece of his fractured puzzle. He may disguise this violence as devotion, as romantic persistence, as evidence of how deeply he cares. But Jung would recognize this immediately as the shadow masquerading as light. the ego's desperate attempt to avoid the dark night of the soul that true individuation requires. The woman who has traversed her own underworld, who has met her shadow and learned to dance with it rather than deny it, can see through this masquerade with crystalline clarity. You recognize the difference between love and obsession, between genuine appreciation and psychological hunger, between someone who sees you and someone who sees only their projection of you. This recognition becomes your shield and your sword, protecting you from manipulation while cutting through illusion to reveal truth. When you maintain your boundaries in the face of his obsession, something extraordinary happens. The very qualities that attracted his fixation, your self-possession, your emotional independence, your refusal to be diminished by his need, become magnified. You become even more mysterious, even more elusive, even more powerful. This is not because you are trying to be these things, but because authenticity has a gravitational pull that no amount of pretense can replicate. The obsessed masculine interprets your boundaries as rejection, your self-care as selfishness, your independence as punishment directed specifically at him. He cannot conceive that your choices have nothing to do with him and everything to do with your commitment to your own psychological health. His worldview is so egocentric that he literally cannot imagine a woman making decisions based on her own inner compass rather than in reaction to his desires. This is where your true power emerges, not in the ability to control his obsession, but in your complete immunity to it. You become like water, fluid, adaptable, powerful enough to carve canyons, yet impossible to grasp. When he reaches for you with desperate hands, you simply flow around his grasping, maintaining your essential nature while refusing to be contained by his need. The psychological dynamic shifts when you truly embody this fluidity. His obsession, which fed on your reactions, your explanations, your attempts to manage his emotions, begins to starve. Without the fuel of your engagement with his projection, the obsession starts to consume itself. He is forced to confront the terrible truth that his suffering is not caused by your unavailability, but by his own inability to be complete within himself. This confrontation with his own emptiness can go one of two ways. Either he will begin the difficult work of shadow integration, of learning to relate to his own inner feminine with respect rather than projection, or he will seek out another woman onto whom he can cast the same archetypal burden. The choice is entirely his, and your recognition of this fact is perhaps the most liberating realization of all. You are not responsible for his psychological evolution. The truly empowered feminine understands that her greatest service to the masculine is not to rescue him from his obsession, but to remain so firmly rooted in her own worth that she becomes a living example of what integration looks like. You become the embodiment of what he could become if he chose to turn inward rather than outward, if he chose shadow work over shadow projection, if he chose individuation over codependence. Your very existence becomes a teaching, though you are not trying to teach. Your boundaries become a gift, though they may be experienced as punishment. Your self-possession becomes an invitation to wholeness, though it will initially be interpreted as rejection. This is the paradox of the feminine energy that has done its inner work. Everything about you serves the highest good, even when it appears to serve only yourself. The alchemical transformation that occurs within you as you navigate this dynamic is profound and irreversible. Each time you choose your own truth over his projection, each time you honor your boundaries despite his emotional manipulation, each time you remain centered while he spirals into the chaos of his unmet needs, you are forging yourself in the fire of authentic power. This is not the power that seeks to dominate or control, but the power that emerges from complete self-ownership. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who others need you to be, is perhaps the most radical act of rebellion possible in a world that profits from your disconnection from yourself. When you refuse to be the vessel for another's psychological incompleteness, you are not just preserving your own sanity. You are modeling a way of being that threatens the very foundations of codependent culture. The obsessed masculine becomes increasingly desperate as he realizes that his usual strategies of manipulation, guilt, and emotional blackmail have no effect on someone who has learned to source her validation internally. His tactics may escalate promises of change, threats of self-harm, declarations of undying love alternating with accusations of cruelty. But the woman who has integrated her shadow recognizes these as the death throes of projection, the final attempts of his ego to avoid the terrifying work of self-confrontation. Your detachment in these moments is not heartlessness, but the highest form of compassion. By refusing to rescue him from the consequences of his own psychological choices, you are giving him the opportunity to develop the very qualities he has been projecting onto you: self-reliance, emotional regulation, the capacity to be alone without being lonely, the ability to love without attachment. The irony is exquisite and perfectly orchestrated by the unconscious mind. The more desperately he pursues you, the more elusive you become, not because you are playing games, but because desperation itself is the antithesis of the integrated masculine energy that could actually meet you as an equal. His obsession is simultaneously the thing that draws him to you and the very quality that makes him incapable of truly connecting with you. You begin to understand that his obsession is not really about you at all. It is about his relationship with the divine feminine archetype that lives within his own psyche. You have simply become the screen onto which he projects this internal drama. The woman he believes he cannot live without is actually the anima he has been running from his entire life, the receptive, intuitive, emotionally intelligent aspect of himself that he learned to reject in order to survive in a culture that equates masculinity with emotional numbness. This recognition brings both profound freedom and profound sadness. Freedom, because you realize that his inability to see you for who you truly are has nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with the quality of his relationship with himself. Sadness, because you recognize the tragedy of a soul so disconnected from its own wholeness that it seeks completion through the possession of another. But this sadness does not move you to rescue or fix or heal. The woman who has done her own shadow work understands that every person must walk their own path through the underworld of their psyche. You cannot do another's inner work for them, no matter how much you may care about their suffering. Attempting to do so would be a violation of their sovereign right to their own journey and a betrayal of your own hard-won wisdom. Instead, you become like the lighthouse, steady, consistent, unmovable, offering guidance to those who seek it, while never leaving your post to chase after ships that refuse to navigate by your light. Your very presence in the world becomes a beacon for others who are ready to do their own work, while simultaneously serving as a mirror for those who are still lost in projection. The metamorphosis reaches its crescendo when you realize that his obsession has become irrelevant to your sense of self. Where once you might have felt flattered, overwhelmed, or responsible for managing his emotional state, you now feel nothing but a quiet compassion for someone trapped in their own psychological prison. This is not numbness or dissociation. This is the profound peace that comes from complete emotional sovereignty. The woman who has reached this level of integration understands that she is no longer available for projection. She has become too real, too present, too grounded in her own truth to serve as a blank canvas for another's psychological drama. This creates a fascinating paradox. The more unavailable she becomes for obsession, the more powerfully she attracts those who are capable of genuine connection. She begins to draw toward herself individuals who have also done their own work, who see her clearly rather than through the distorted lens of their unmet needs. Meanwhile, the obsessed masculine finds himself in an increasingly untenable position. His projections bounce off your integrated psyche like arrows off armor, returning to him with doubled force. He is confronted again and again with the reality that his suffering is self-created, that his emptiness cannot be filled by another, that his salvation lies not in winning your love, but in learning to love himself. This confrontation with his own shadow often triggers what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period of profound psychological crisis where all external sources of validation are stripped away, leaving him alone with the very aspects of himself he has been avoiding. Some men will use this crisis as a catalyst for genuine transformation, finally beginning the shadow work they have been avoiding. Others will simply find a new target for their projections, never learning the fundamental lesson that completion comes from within. Your role in this drama is not to determine which path he chooses, but to remain so firmly anchored in your own truth that you cannot be pulled into his psychological chaos. You have become like a mountain, unmovable, majestic, weathering all storms while maintaining your essential nature. From this place of unshakable centeredness, you can witness his struggle with the detached compassion of someone who understands that every soul must find its own way home. The ancient wisdom of the Stoics becomes your daily practice, accepting what you cannot control while taking full responsibility for what you can. You cannot control his obsession, his emotional reactions, his choice to remain stuck in projection, or to begin genuine self-work. But you can control your response to his obsession, your commitment to your own boundaries, your refusal to be diminished by his inability to see you clearly. This Stoic approach to relationships revolutionizes your entire experience of love. You begin to understand the difference between attachment and love, between needing someone and choosing them, between being completed by another and sharing your completeness with another. Love, you realize, is not the desperate hunger of two incomplete beings seeking wholeness through merger, but the joyful recognition between two whole beings who choose to share their individual journeys. The obsessed masculine cannot comprehend this mature form of love because he has never experienced it. His model of relationship is based on scarcity, possession, and the belief that love is something to be earned through suffering, pursuit, or sacrifice. He literally cannot imagine a love that is freely given and freely received, a love that enhances rather than completes, a love that celebrates independence rather than seeking to eliminate it. As you embody this higher octave of love, something miraculous happens. You stop attracting obsession and start attracting reverence. The quality of attention you receive transforms from the hungry desperation of projection to the appreciative recognition of authentic connection. Men who have done their own work begin to appear in your life, individuals who see your strength and do not seek to diminish it, who celebrate your independence rather than trying to overcome it, who love you not because they need you, but because they choose you. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. Reach your Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.